I'm a journalist by profession, but I have a very odd hobby. I sketch people in the nude, people from all walks of life, men, women, young, old, writers, teachers, models, monks, even prostitute. My living space converts into a private space for public nudity. I call it private because I assure anonymity and privacy of my subjects. I don't call them nudes, I call them my subjects, even if they don't want it. Because to me, the phenomenon is important, not the person. Public, because I interact with my subject without any context of intimacy or relationship. Believe me, people look very different without their clothes on. My hobby transformed into a social experiment. Nudity was not the end of the exercise, it was the beginning. It was a ticket to enter into this very special space, like I mentioned, private space for public nudity, where there was no set agenda and it was open to possibilities. It all started, I think, 7-8 years ago. I am fascinated with the human body, the form. I feel it's one of the greatest creations of the nature. And so I would do these harmless anatomical drawings. And one day, this French couple who were in Delhi for a project, and they happened to see my sketchbook, and they asked me, "Oh, do you sketch live models?" And I said, "Not so far." And they volunteered to be my first models. So basically, they existed in the nude in their South Delhi flat, and I would just sit and draw for hours. And this went on for 2 months, twice or thrice a week. I mean, what a great experience it was. So when they left after 2 months, I didn't miss them as much as sketching them in the nude. And it, in me, created this potent need to sketch people in the nude. The need was so intense that I started asking people to pose. And so it's kind of interesting how I devised a way to do it. I would show people my sketchbook and say, "Well, see, this is what I draw. People have posed for me," and they'll appreciate, but their appreciation was apprehensive. And I said, "Oh, Indians, do they pose?" And I said, "Well, they do, and how about you posing?" And they'd be like dumbstruck. "What? You want us to pose in the nude like this," pointing to the sketches. And I'd say, I'll stand still and say, "Well, I do nudes." And nudes have no degree. There's nothing called semi-nude. Either you are in the nude or you're not. To my utter amazement, many agreed to pose. And it's interesting how they reacted. Some would say, "Well, no." But no always doesn't mean no. Some called me up later and said, "Well, I thought about it. We can have a session." Yes is not always yes either. Because some people who said yes, "Oh, let's do it now." And I said, "Well, can't because I don't have a sketchbook." He says, "Okay, let's do it on Saturday afternoon." They come and say, "Okay, draw me just the upper half." And I say, "Well, that doesn't work that way." They say, "Oh, I'm not comfortable." People who actually pose are the ones who say, "Well, I'll think about it." The longest duration between somebody agreeing to pose and actually posing is 3 years. So which was also very interesting. Now, what happens in that space? I think power equations are highly skewed in my favor. It's my house, my living room. I invite people. I ask them to strip, pose naked, and stay in that state for hours as long as they want to. And I will not ignore the fact that they are naked. Instead, I will look at them and draw. It's such a vulnerable situation to be in. And they're jittery. And the transition is difficult when they strip. So that's when they need privacy. So I go out of the room and say, well, I'll be back in a minute. Why don't you get ready, which is basically strip. And I say, well, I'll get you a cup of coffee or something. When I come back, they're kind of logged or wrapped in a bed sheet or in some very uncomfortable state. It takes time. They feel extremely vulnerable. But when they exist in the state of vulnerability, they feel they aren't. And that's a very empowering thing. Power equations change. Many of my subjects, and I can't put a percentage to it, but I would say majority of them, confront me with my nudity as they get comfortable with their new state of being. So some would come and stand very close to me and put their shoulders around my neck and say, oh, what have you done? Some would generally start fanning their thighs. Others would, fondle. And when they do this, when they do these sexually explicit acts, they're looking straight into my face. So I'm kind of drawing, and then I look up, and I see them do this, and I'm like shocked. And they derive such great pleasure in seeing me perturbed because of their potent nudity. So power equations also change. What I've observed is that there is no stereotype, only individuals. If I think, well, gay men will pose, that's not true. If I think, well, rural girls will pose, that's not true. If I think older people will not pose, that's not at all true. So there is no stereotype. There are individuals, each individual pose for their own specific reason. People could be bored, people just want some challenge in their life, they just want to challenge themselves, or just they want to figure out what the hell this guy is doing, So to figure that out, I need to pose. So a lot of these funny things happen. But I'd like to emphasize here that it's a collaborative process of art. In each of my drawings, there is an element of me. And a writer who posed for me described the situation best. Even before he did pose, he says, well, I want to see how I look from your eyes. And so there is inherently a huge amount of element in me. Oh, I forgot to mention about the sketch. So how vulnerability changes into empowerment in this space, she's an excellent example. Like I told you, people need privacy during the transition or when they strip. So when I came back, she was still dressed, and I said, so we had coffee, we finished coffee, and I said, well, do you remember why you're here? And she said, oh, you didn't remind me, so should I strip? I said, yes, and she just stood before me and stripped. And then she said, okay, draw me like this. And I said, oh, take it easy, So things change, and this girl is a good example for it, and she is an Indian girl from a very small town. Now, getting to the philosophical aspect of this whole experience. I feel we carry complex identity. I don't feel we do carry complex identities. We have a national identity, we have a religious identity, we have a caste identity, we have a professional identity, we have a sexual identity. I don't know how many identities we have. And clothes are the most potent instrument to project that identity. We dress up not just because We feel we look good in a particular dress, but we want to project a certain image by wearing those clothes. And therefore, most of the people dress up differently for different occasions. A related concept to this projection is that there is this inherent need to control people's perception about us. What does you or he or she feel about me is very important to me. And there's always a kind of a trench between what we are and what we want others to see us as. It might vary from person to person, but there is always an element of projection. And I feel, and I've observed, that clothes are a very important instrument to make that projection, to make a statement about ourselves. So when people aren't wearing clothes, they feel they aren't making that statement. Projection is also a function of imperfect information. If I don't know about my subject, which is the case in 50% of the cases, second time I met them, they were sitting naked before me posing. So I had no clue who they are. If they'd say, well, I've done masters in economics from London School of Economics, I'll believe them. If they say I'm an astrophysicist, I'll believe them. So I don't know anything about them. But since they're sitting naked in front of me, they feel I know everything about them, just because I've seen them naked. And what an interesting psychology sets in. They feel since I know everything about them, because I can see them naked, there is no point in hiding anything. And what sets in is very interesting. This outpour, this conversation, which is absolutely heartwarming. And you know, I'm a kind of a witness to it. People talk about things that they would not talk to anyone otherwise, you know, because they exist in a certain context. Their attributes, their background, their profession, or whatever they represent, bind them into behaving in a certain way in public. But when they are in the nude and they have nothing to hide, they say what they feel. And what they say is very different from their stated public position. I feel I'm connected to them with a notional cord. I relive their experiences. So if they are comfortable, I'm comfortable. If they are uncomfortable, I cannot draw. If they get horny, I get horny. But what I call orgasmic sketching is when they become indifferent to their nudity, to my presence, to the whole space. And it happens very, very often. And that's what my brief is. Can you forget the fact that you're naked, like you don't remember the fact that you're dressed? And this is one good example. He is an accomplished environmentalist. And this was 7th or 8th sketch that evening, the last. And by the end of it all, he absolutely ignored me, the fact that I was sketching. And he just stood on the bed, staring at the wall. And he started saying something, which didn't make sense to me, but then I tried to hear what he's trying to say, and he said, well, you know, nuclear power is not green. And I'm like sketching, and I'm wondering what the hell is he talking about. And so, in a while, I realized the sketch is done. It took me about 3 or 4 minutes. But in my memory, the act of sketching, or making this sketch, is like a black hole. I don't remember making this sketch. Nor does he remember the fact that he was there posing for me for this sketch. And that's what I call as the orgasmic sketch. I look at my subjects as a flame. Flame is a metaphor. It doesn't matter who they are, how they look, what they do, how accomplished, rich or poor, whatever they are, it just doesn't matter. I just deal with them and not who they are, which is such an empowering experience to me as well, because I'm essentially hugely bored in life, doing things. You know, even journalism, my career, which allows me to deal with different set of people at different points in time, it also becomes a routine. and we become so apathetic to kind of happenings. If I were to go and cover Kashmir today, I'd wonder, oh, how will I get to speak people rather than to empathize with what's happening there. So my observation is, irrespective of who the people are, where they belong, what they do, in that space where they, for momentarily, are emancipated from their existential dilemmas, I'd put it that way, gravitate towards a common mean. I mean, of course, they look very different. But I feel that they all, in a notional sense, represent the same very basic humanistic essentialism kind of aspects. And so there is not much huge difference. People tend to do similar things. When they feel when they feel relaxed, or they feel emancipated from this huge burden of foster identities that they carry in public, they sometimes dance, they go to sleep, they enter into a trance like this. All sorts of things happen. And nothing is predictable. Every case is so different, and that's why this particular hobby has pulled me out of this boredom forever. But I've done enough of sketches in my living room. So now I basically want to change the setting. Instead of me inviting my subjects to come over to my living room, I want to travel to their living rooms. I want to travel world over and to my subjects in their space and replicate this social experiment, conversations in the nude. And I want to see whether my observation that we humans, irrespective of who we are, what we represent, are essentially similar. Thank you.